Submitted for review to the Grand Council of the Galactic Federation. Classification level, deeply embarrassing. Date, standard cycle, 7249.3. By first observer Kix et al. Of the Superior Species Recognition Department. Let the record show that I submit this report under protest, and only because 17 separate superior officers have refused to document these events themselves. I maintain that the entire incident was merely an unfortunate series of coincidences that could have happened to any advanced civilization's military force. The fact that it happened to be our most elite technological assessment team is completely irrelevant. The incident in question began during our standard evaluation of Sol 3, known to its primitive inhabitants as Earth. Our initial scans detected the usual signs of an emerging spacefaring species: scattered orbital debris, primitive chemical rockets, and an embarrassing number of devices dedicated solely to capturing images of their domesticated fauna. Nothing suggested we would encounter anything beyond the typical fumbling steps of yet another gravity-bound species. I feel compelled to note that Commander Vixathor, may their tentacles rest in peace, did suggest we conduct a more thorough analysis of human gravitational engineering capabilities. However, given that humans still primarily used controlled explosions to escape their gravity well, this suggestion was met with the ridicule it clearly deserved at the time. In hindsight, perhaps we should have wondered why a species would continue using such crude methods when they clearly understood more elegant solutions. The first sign that something was amiss came during our initial contact. Protocol dictated we demonstrate our technological superiority by dramatically emerging from a cleverly hidden spatial fold directly above their largest military installation. The effect was somewhat diminished when our emergence point shifted 3 kilometers to the left, placing us above something called a Dave and Buster's. I maintain that this spatial displacement was due to a minor calibration error and not, as some have suggested, because the humans were already manipulating local space-time fields for their amusement. It was at this establishment that we first encountered Chief Engineer Rodriguez, a designation that still triggers involuntary chromatophore spasms among our surviving crew members. She was, as our cultural database indicated, was typical for human engineers, consuming a beverage with sufficient ethanol content to strip paint while simultaneously solving complex equations on what appeared to be a napkin. When our arrival caused several gaming devices to malfunction, she merely looked up, sighed, and asked if we had bothered to account for gravitational lensing in our cloaking calculations. The sheer audacity of a primitive human questioning our mastery of basic physics principles demanded an immediate response. Unfortunately, our automated translation matrix chose that moment to have an existential crisis over the proper interpretation of human idioms, leaving us to rely on universal translator badges that, in retrospect, may not have been fully calibrated for human sarcasm levels. What followed was, without question, the most humiliating first contact scenario in the history of the Galactic Federation. And yes, I am including the infamous xylophone incident of cycle 6998. At least they had the excuse of mistaking a musical instrument for a diplomatic representative. Shall I continue with the next phase of this report? Or would the Council prefer to take a moment to process the gravity of the situation? I apologize for that last statement. Human linguistic patterns appear to be infectious. Upon realizing our dramatic entrance had been slightly compromised, Commander Vixathor decided to proceed with Standard Protocol 47B, Overwhelming Display of Technological Superiority. This typically involves hovering our ship in a menacing manner while projecting our most impressive holograms of space battles we've definitely won and not just simulated for exactly this purpose. Chief Engineer Rodriguez, however, seemed more interested in her beverage than our display. She actually raised her hand like a student in a learning pod and asked, without a trace of appropriate awe, if we were planning to compensate for the gravitational micro-lensing effect on our hologram projectors, or if we just enjoyed having our epic space battles look like they were being performed by drunken puppets. Commander Vixathor, displaying the quick thinking that had earned them their position, immediately declared that the distortion was intentional, a clever test to evaluate human observational capabilities. The human responded by drawing a series of calculations on another napkin, demonstrating exactly how to correct the issue. She then had the audacity to fold the napkin into what she called a paper airplane and launch it with suspicious accuracy through our supposedly impenetrable shield barrier. The resulting silence in our command center was broken only by Lieutenant Mixatal whispering, "That's not supposed to be possible, right?" This profound observation earned them an immediate promotion to head of our newly formed What Just Happened department. Determined to regain control of the situation, Commander Vixathor launched into our carefully prepared speech about humanity's primitive status and our gracious offer to guide their species toward proper civilization. The speech was somewhat undermined by the fact that our gravity generators chose that exact moment to hiccup, causing our entire crew to float momentarily before crashing back to the deck. Chief Engineer Rodriguez didn't even look up from her new napkin calculations. "You guys really should check your graviton containment seals. They're leaking all over the place. It's like watching a first-year engineering student try to build a quantum fence using duct tape and optimism." The commander, their chromatophores now flashing what our species recognizes as extreme diplomatic distress, demanded to know how a primitive human could possibly detect graviton leakage. Rodriguez pointed to her drinking glass where the liquid was forming complex geometric patterns that apparently shouldn't have been possible under normal gravitational conditions. "Also," she added, "your artificial gravity field is interfering with the arcade's pinball machines. Do you have any idea how hard it is to hit a high score when gravity keeps taking coffee breaks?" It was at this point that Commander Vixathor made what our subsequent psychological evaluation termed an emotionally understandable but tactically questionable decision. They challenged humanity to prove their supposed mastery of gravitational engineering, declaring that primitive beings who still used chemical rockets couldn't possibly understand the true complexities of gravitational manipulation. The human's response was to pull out something called a smartphone and make what she termed a few calls. Within 20 minutes, the parking lot of Dave and Buster's had become an impromptu gathering of what we would later learn was humanity's most dangerous demographic, bored engineers with something to prove. Looking back, I believe this was the moment when we should have recognized that the situation had escalated beyond our standard first contact protocols. Any species that can mobilize a task force of theoretical physicists and practical engineers faster than most civilizations can order lunch deserves, at minimum, a cautionary footnote in the contact guidelines. The next few hours must be documented for posterity, if only to explain why the Galactic Federation's Manual of First Contact Procedures now includes an entire chapter titled, "Just because they're still using rockets doesn't mean they're stupid." The human engineers, led by the increasingly troublesome Chief Engineer Rodriguez, proposed what they called a friendly little wager. They would demonstrate their understanding of gravitational manipulation using only locally sourced materials and equipment. If they succeeded, we would have to admit humanity's technological competence and, in their words, buy the next round. Commander Vixathor, still operating under the clearly flawed assumption that beings who couldn't even agree on a standardized system of measurement couldn't possibly master gravitational engineering, readily agreed. They even offered to make the challenge more interesting by allowing the humans to choose the specific parameters of the test. In retrospect, the gleam in Chief Engineer Rodriguez's eyes should have triggered every warning system we possessed. The humans requested 1 hour to prepare, during which time our sensors detected numerous rapid communications across their primitive global network. Various vehicles began arriving, carrying equipment that our scanners initially classified as harmless entertainment devices. I must now formally request that our threat assessment protocols be updated to recognize that anything humans classify as entertainment is potentially lethal when properly modified. The proposed test seemed deceptively simple. The humans would demonstrate their grasp of gravitational manipulation by creating what they termed a localized gravity well, using only the equipment they had gathered. Success would be measured by their ability to affect the trajectory of a small object of their choosing through this artificial gravity field. Commander Vixathor, displaying the confidence that would soon become tragically ironic, insisted on adding additional parameters to make the challenge more interesting. They declared that our ship would generate a competing gravitational field, and the humans would have to compensate for both fields simultaneously to achieve their goal. Chief Engineer Rodriguez agreed with suspicious enthusiasm, then asked, with what we now recognize as dangerous innocence, if we would mind providing a detailed readout of our ship's gravitational field parameters just to keep things fair. The commander, magnanimously assuming this request came from primitive uncertainty, agreed to display our exact gravitational specifications. I feel compelled to note that several junior officers attempted to point out that the humans were taking an unusually detailed interest in these readings. Their concerns were dismissed under the common but evidently flawed assumption that a species still arguing about whether their smallest planet counts as a planet couldn't possibly understand the complexities of our gravitational technology. As the humans began assembling their demonstration, several of them engaged our crew in what appeared to be casual conversation about our ship's systems. Only later did we realize these conversations were suspiciously focused on our gravitational control mechanisms, backup systems, and emergency protocols. One particularly cheerful human even convinced our chief engineer to explain exactly how our gravitational stabilizers compensated for external interference, all under the guise of what they called professional courtesy. When Chief Engineer Rodriguez announced they were ready to begin, our sensors detected an unusual level of suppressed amusement among the gathered humans. Commander Vixathor, interpreting this as primitive nervousness, gave a patronizing speech about how there was no shame in failing against a superior species. The humans' response was to wheel out what appeared to be a modified entertainment device labeled Dance Dance Revolution, and announced they were ready to proceed with what they called Operation Newton's Revenge. Let the record show that the next sequence of events has been verified by multiple witnesses, 17 separate sensor logs, and one viral video that humans continue to share under the title, Aliens Learn About Gravity, LOL. The humans' demonstration began with Chief Engineer Rodriguez placing a single metal sphere, approximately the size of a human fist, onto their modified entertainment device. She explained that they would use their primitive understanding of gravitational fields to guide this sphere through a series of precisely controlled maneuvers, compensating for both natural gravity and our ship's artificial field. Commander Vixathor, still radiating smugness through every chromatophore, activated our ship's gravitational field at full power. They announced that any primitive attempt at gravitational manipulation would now be completely overwhelmed by our superior technology. The humans responded by initiating what they called their calibration sequence. In retrospect, the fact that this sequence perfectly matched the resonant frequency of our primary gravitational generators should have raised more concerns. The modified entertainment device began pulsing in a complex pattern. At first, nothing appeared to happen, leading Commander Vixathor to begin a prepared speech about the futility of primitive technological attempts. This speech was interrupted when our ship's artificial gravity suddenly hiccuped, Chief Engineer Rodriguez grinning in a way that several crew members would later describe as traumatically smug, explained that they were simply using their device to create a precisely calibrated counter-resonance to our gravitational field. She went on to demonstrate how they could now manipulate local gravitational forces, using what she called basic harmonic interference patterns. The metal sphere began to move in direct defiance of what several physics degrees had assured me was possible. It danced across the modified entertainment device, tracing complex patterns that our sensors insisted were requiring gravitational precision far beyond primitive capabilities. Chief Engineer Rodriguez explained that they were merely applying some basic principles of quantum gravitational manipulation. You know, the kind of stuff we teach undergrads. Commander Vixathor, their chromatophores now flashing in patterns that our ship's computer classified as existential crisis, ordered an immediate increase in our gravitational field strength. This proved to be, in technical terms, a very bad idea. The human's device instantly adjusted its output, creating what they later described as a gravitational feedback loop. The resulting cascade of gravitational fluctuations had several immediate effects. Our ship's primary gravitational generators overloaded in what one human engineer described as the most predictable equipment failure since the Hindenburg. The backup systems, attempting to compensate, created a series of gravitational waves that caused our vessel to bounce like a cork in a storm. Most humiliatingly, the ship's emergency protocols, detecting the gravitational chaos, initiated our experimental emergency spatial displacement system. This experimental system, which 17 separate engineers had assured us was impossible to activate accidentally, proceeded to relocate our vessel approximately 100 meters to the left and 12 meters up. Unfortunately, this new position happened to place us directly above what humans call a bounce house, that had been set up for something called a kid's birthday party. The resulting interaction between our failing gravitational systems and the inflatable structure led to what human witnesses would later describe as the most awesome bounce house incident in history. Several small humans were reportedly disappointed when their parents wouldn't let them do it again. As our crew struggled to restore stability, Chief Engineer Rodriguez calmly explained that they had merely used our own gravitational field against us, amplifying and redirecting our energy through a series of what she called gravity mirrors, built into their modified entertainment device. She then offered to explain the basic principles to our engineering team, preferably over something called happy hour. Commander Vixathor, displaying what I choose to interpret as diplomatic wisdom, declared the demonstration conclusively successful moments before ordering an immediate tactical retreat. Our departure was slightly delayed by the need to disentangle our ship from the remains of the bounce house, during which time several human children asked if we could make everything float again. The immediate aftermath of what humans now refer to as the Great Gravity Game requires careful documentation, if only to explain why the Galactic Federation's diplomatic corps now includes mandatory physics refresher courses. Our tactical retreat was complicated by several factors. First, our gravitational generators required extensive recalibration before we could achieve stable spaceflight. This process was not helped by the constant stream of advice being broadcast from the ground by helpful human engineers, who kept pointing out exactly what we were doing wrong with what our linguistic experts classified as aggressive helpfulness. Second, Commander Vixathor was experiencing what our medical staff diagnosed as acute technological superiority disorder, a condition previously thought to be purely theoretical. Symptoms included compulsively muttering equations and occasionally trying to deny the existence of gravity altogether. Third, and perhaps most devastatingly to our species' reputation, humans had recorded the entire incident. By the time we achieved stable orbit, the footage had already spread across their global information network. Our cultural analysis team reported that it had spawned something called memes, which apparently serve as humanity's preferred method of immortalizing particularly embarrassing moments. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and severe. The Galactic Federation's Department of Species Classification was forced to convene an emergency session to debate whether a species should be reclassified based on what one council member termed clearly showing off. The fact that humans had achieved this demonstration using modified entertainment devices led to a complete overhaul of how we evaluate technological advancement. Chief Engineer Rodriguez, now officially classified as a Class 3 diplomatic incident in her own right, submitted a detailed technical paper to our science division, explaining exactly how they had achieved their gravitational manipulation. The paper was titled Gravity Manipulation for Dummies, a beginner's guide to not embarrassing yourself in front of primitive species. Our science division initially dismissed it as primitive sarcasm, until they tried to disprove the math and found it disturbingly sound. The human engineering community, displaying what we now recognize as their species' characteristic blend of helpfulness and mockery, began sending us unsolicited advice about our technology. Several human universities offered free spots in their physics programs to our engineering staff, with one adding a note that they would waive the usual prerequisites under the circumstances. Perhaps most alarmingly, our intelligence division began detecting signs that humans had already started incorporating their newfound understanding of our gravitational technology into their entertainment systems. Reports indicate that something called the Ultimate Dance Dance Revolution Tournament is now classified as a potential technological threat due to its creative use of gravitational manipulation. Commander Vixathor, upon being released from medical observation, submitted their own report. It consisted entirely of the phrase, "Gravity is a social construct," repeated 7,000 times. They have been granted extended medical leave and a position in our newly formed Department of Human Technological Assessment, which primarily involves reviewing human entertainment devices for potential weapons applications. The humans, for their part, seemed to treat the entire incident as some sort of enormous practical joke. They even sent us a gift, a small entertainment device they called a Magic 8 Ball, modified to always display the message "Outlook not so gravity" when used in null gravity conditions. Our xenopsychology department is still trying to determine if this counts as a declaration of war or just another example of what humans call trolling. In conclusion, this incident has necessitated several significant changes to Galactic Federation protocols regarding first contact situations and technological assessment procedures. The following recommendations have been implemented with what our bureaucracy classifies as unusual haste, primarily because 3 different first contact teams managed to embarrass themselves in similar ways before this report could be filed. First, the standard species development scale has been revised to include a new classification. Appears primitive, but is probably just messing with us. Earth has been designated as the prototype for this category, with a special notation that any species still using chemical rockets should be approached with extreme caution and a thorough understanding of basic physics. The fact that we had to add a subsection titled "No, really, they're probably messing with you" speaks volumes about our continued underestimation of human ingenuity. Second, our military training programs now include a mandatory course titled "Just because they're having fun doesn't mean they're not dangerous." The course uses our encounter as its primary case study, with special emphasis on the section "Why you should be worried when humans start giggling during technological demonstrations." The course's practical exam involves identifying potential weapons applications in various human entertainment devices. The number of senior officers who have failed this exam is classified at the highest levels. Third, the Federation's Research and Development Division has been forced to create an entirely new department dedicated to studying human entertainment devices. Their first report, titled "From Pong to Apocalypse: The Military Applications of Human Gaming Technology," has been classified as required reading for all contact teams. The appendix on "Why Dance Dance Revolution should be considered a weapon of mass destruction" is particularly enlightening, especially the section detailing potential applications of something humans call lag compensation to temporal mechanics. Our ongoing monitoring of Earth has revealed several disturbing trends that I feel compelled to document for future reference. Human engineers have begun incorporating what they call gravity mods into various entertainment systems, citing our demonstration as inspiration. We've detected unusual gravitational fluctuations around several human educational institutions, particularly their physics departments, during what they term grad student happy hours. One facility had to be evacuated after someone accidentally created what they called a sick gravitational light show during a physics department party. Most concerning of all, Chief Engineer Rodriguez has reportedly begun teaching a university course titled Advanced Gravitational Manipulation Through Gaming Systems, because sometimes the best way to learn physics is to mess with aliens. The course has a 3-year waiting list and has somehow been accredited as both a physics and a physical education requirement. The waiting list reportedly grew even longer after word spread that students had successfully modified a game called Pokemon Go to create localized gravity wells around rare Pokemon spawns. Commander Vixathor, having completed their medical leave, has taken up a new hobby, collecting human physics textbooks. They've arranged them in what they claim is a gravitationally stable pattern in their quarters, though visitors report the books occasionally float when no one is looking directly at them. Their most recent acquisition, Quantum Mechanics for Gamers, because reality is just a really complex physics engine, has been added to the official watch list of potentially dangerous human publications. The modified Dance Dance Revolution machine that caused this entire incident has been officially classified as a Class 1 restricted technology by the Federation. This classification was briefly questioned until someone pointed out that human engineers had started referring to it as the prototype and had begun organizing what they called extreme physics raves. The Federation's Security Council spent 3 hours debating whether these events should be classified as weapons testing or performance art before finally deciding on both. Several member species have submitted formal protests about human technological classification, pointing out that any species capable of weaponizing their entertainment systems should automatically be considered highly advanced. These protests were temporarily withdrawn after humans sent each complaining species a device called a joy buzzer, modified to create localized static electricity fields. The resulting diplomatic incident has been classified under Humans Practical Jokes Division. My personal recommendation, which I expect to be ignored with the same enthusiasm as Commander Vixathor's initial suggestions about human gravitational engineering capabilities, is that we should seriously consider whether any species that treats physics as a source of entertainment should be allowed unsupervised access to the laws of nature. The fact that 3 different human universities have already announced plans for what they call physics game jams suggests this recommendation may be too late. To address the persistent rumor about humans offering to upgrade our ship's gravitational systems, yes, they did make this offer. No, we are not going to accept it. The last time someone accepted human technical assistance, their entire space station started playing something called Never Gonna Give You Up every time they activated their artificial gravity. The humans insisted this was a feature, not a bug, and offered to upgrade it to play something called Sandstorm instead. Our xenopsychologists are still trying to determine whether humanity's apparent compulsion to turn everything into a game represents a unique evolutionary adaptation or simply what humans call trolling taken to its logical conclusion. Their preliminary report, titled Why Everything Humans Touch Becomes Either a Weapon or a Toy, or usually both, suggests we may never know the difference. End report. P.S. To the inevitable future reader of this report, who is researching why their own first contact with humans went horribly wrong. Yes, they're probably still doing this. No, they haven't stopped finding it hilarious. Yes, you should have checked their gravitational technology first. No, that game console is not just a game console. Welcome to the club. We meet Thursdays in the physics lab, assuming the artificial gravity is working this week. PPS Chief Engineer Rodriguez has requested that I add her contact information to this report in case any other aliens want to learn about gravity. This request has been denied on the grounds that we've already had to rescue 3 different species from what humans call epic pranks, though I must admit, the one involving the modified Carnival Gravitron was impressively creative.